Hi, my name is Keith Bradner, and we're going to be going through the SteamVR Unity plugin planting tutorial. This is going to be focused on using the new SteamVR input system. We're going to start from a blank Unity project, import the plugin, test out the interaction system, and then add our own action set and action. For a headset, I'm going to be using the HTC Vive Pro. And for controllers, I'm going to be using the Knuckles. But this should work with pretty much any SteamVR compatible headset and controllers. Alright, let's get started. So I'm going to open Unity. I'm going to use version 2018.3.1 and make a new project and call it Planting Tutorial. Now the major change with the SteamVR input, as opposed to the old style of input, is that you get actions. Actions are nice because they let you focus on the user's intent. Instead of hard coding a bunch of different buttons per controller for the same user action, you can just focus on the action in your code and then set up these different buttons in bindings that users can then rebind if they so choose. When a new controller comes out, you don't have to change any code, you just add a new default binding. Or you can let your users add new default bindings. I've already downloaded the plugin, so I'm just going to go ahead and import that. You can get that off of our GitHub repo or off of the asset store. If you're upgrading from SteamVR Unity plugin 1.2.3, this will be a significant change, as you'll have to implement the new SteamVR input system. But if you're upgrading from version 2.0, then all you'll have to do is delete your SteamVR input folder and regenerate actions, and then reset any that you've set in the editor. You're not going to have to recreate your binding file or recreate your action manifest. All that will stay. You just might have to reset some things in the editor. Alright, so I'm going to just accept these defaults that SteamVR wants me to. And the first thing that you're going to want to do when you open a new SteamVR project is go to the SteamVR input window. And it's going to tell you that you don't have an actions file. So since we're going to be using the SteamVR interaction system, we're just going to import the default example files. But for your own project, you don't have to. You can just click No and create all your own actions. When I'm creating my own projects, I generally start with these just because they're nice to start with, but it really depends on the project that you're doing. So it's copied over these JSON files. Let's take a look at those. So we've got this actions JSON, that's your action manifest. That sets up each individual action, kind of defines it. And then these binding files bind those actions to specific controllers or headsets. You'll notice here there's listings for controllers and headsets because you can bind things on the headset as well, namely the proximity sensor. Okay, so we've got these files. Let's generate some actions. If you're coming from SteamVR Unity plugin 2.0, you'll notice this is extremely quick. That's because we no longer create scriptable objects and cycle through each scene and set those to each prefab and each component. Now we're just generating some code, and we have a static class called SteamVR Actions, which holds those actions. Let's take a quick look at this window. I've got action sets up here. These are groupings of actions. So the idea is if you're doing a discrete task, then you create an action set for that task, and then you can create each action inside of that. This prevents collisions between different actions that may be using the same button. If I'm using, for example, the trigger to jump on the platformer, and the trigger to do throttle on the RC buggy, then if both of those action sets are enabled at the same time, then I'm going to run into problems. But since they're in their own action sets, I can separate those out. So now let's go into the interaction system scene. You may notice some new objects in here. We've got a new SteamVR skeleton poser component that lets you transition smoothly from the SteamVR skeleton input data to your own custom posed hand. We use this mainly for grabbing objects, but you might use it to create a specific gesture that you want in your game. Okay, let's go into VR. So you can see I've got controllers in the virtual world as well as hands. And the Knuckles controller is giving me per finger data. And I've got this teleport hint that's letting me know how I can teleport, pointing towards the touchpad. I was talking about the skeleton poser component a second ago. You can see I can go from this skeleton input data to grabbing an object where it conforms to the shape of the object. And it blends that. Let's go over to the grenades over here. Over here you can see two different types of poses. So I'm grabbing this grenade right now with the grip of the Knuckles controller. You'll notice the 3 fingers are down here, and my 2 fingers are up, but I've actually got some additive animation here. So I can curl these fingers and they'll wrap around the grenade. I can also pick it up with a pinch grip, which for the Knuckles controllers is the touchpad and the trigger. And you'll see now I can use my bottom fingers. And this just gives you more of a sense of presence while in your application. We have a specific SteamVR skeleton poser tutorial for more information on that. But let's get back to the planting. So we verified that the interaction system works. Let's go ahead and create our own action. So in the SteamVR input window, I'm going to add an action set here. And I'm going to call it farming. Then I'm going to create an action, call that plant. I'm going to keep it as a Boolean action. There's other options here. And I'm going to make it mandatory. Actually, we'll keep it as suggested. You don't have to plant. Localized string is what shows up to your users when they're rebinding your actions. So now since I've created this action, I'm going to hit save and generate. And that's going to delete that SteamVR input folder and regenerate code files for me. Once that's happened, I can click Open Binding UI to open the SteamVR input binding UI. Here you'll see the controller that I'm currently using, along with what binding I'm currently using. This is the binding that's on disk. We're going to edit that. Here you'll see the farming action set is red because it's got an action that hasn't been bound. So let's click on that. And let's bind that action. Let's see. I'm going to bind it to something that's not generally being used. Let's bind it to the A button. There's a lot of different ways you can bind buttons to actions. I want something simple here, so I'm just going to use the button mode and the click part of the button mode. And then I'm going to select my plant action. And you'll notice over here I've now bound my plant action to the A button on my left controller. But over here on the right controller, I also have my plant action bound. That's because we've got mirror mode enabled here. That's for scenarios where you want the same action on both controllers. If that's not what you want, you can uncheck that box and bind things individually. So now that I've bound this action, I'm going to hit Replace Default Bindings. And that's going to save my binding that I've created here to that default JSON in the root of my project, because I want that to be distributed with all the copies of my application. Here we're just editing my personal binding. Hitting that Replace Default Binding button saves it to my project. So remember to do that. All right, let's go back to Unity here. So since I want to use this action, but it's in its own action set. So I need to activate that set. Let's create a new game object. Call it Activate Farming. We have a component specifically devoted to this task called SteamVR Activate Action Set on Load. And it's going to activate on start and deactivate on destroy. So if you change scenes, then this action set will get deactivated. And then let's select the farming set. You can also set it to only activate for specific sources. Like if I only wanted to be able to farm with my left or my right hand, then I could select that here. That makes a little more sense when you're picking up individual objects and you want to only activate a set for a specific hand that's holding that object. But this is going to be active all the time, so we're just going to keep it active for all input devices. Now let's go into the player, the SteamVR objects in the left and right hand. And I've already created a planting script and included it in the plugin for you to use. So let's add that component. It's called planting. And then on this planting script, we're going to set the plant action to be plant. You'll notice when I bring up this list, it's listing all the Boolean actions. So it's not listing vector2 actions or pose actions or anything like that. It's only listing the things that make sense for this property. Hand will get set on enable, and the prefab to plant is already set too. All right, let's save that and go into VR. Just going to teleport over here. And you can watch me press the A button and flowers get planted relative to where that controller is. And again, this is per controller, so I can do it with each one. Cool. And these are interactable objects, so you can just pick them up, throw them. All right, let's take a look at how this planning script actually works. So in my planning script here, I've got a SteamVR action Boolean. So that holds our action. That lets us set it in the editor. I've got the hand, which gets set on enable, and the prefab to plant. In our enable function, we get the hand. We throw an error if there's no action set. And the interesting part is that we subscribe to an event. So this is taking our plant action, and on change, we add a listener. So when the plant action changes for a specific input source, we're going to execute a function. When you subscribe to events, you also have to unsubscribe from events. So I'm subscribing on enable, so I want to unsubscribe on disable by removing the onChange listener. So in our event, when that fires, we get a new value for the action, and if it's true, then we plant. Our plant coroutine is pretty simple. It raycasts down, instantiates prefab and grows it. So this script is nice, but it only plants one flower at a time. And I want like a lot more flowers. So let's create our own planting script. I'm just going to copy all the contents of this, go to the root of my assets, create a new C# script called myPlanting. And I'm going to paste in that script and rename the class to myPlanting. So you can access actions in the editor, or you can access actions in code. So let's take out this editor action and show you how to do that. And take out the whole on disable, take out this function. Let's actually use a function you're a little more familiar with, update. So in update, I want to check this plant action. I need a reference to it. One of the things that saving and generating our actions does is it generates us a reference to a static reference to each of our actions. One of the things that saving and generating does is it creates a static reference to each of our actions that we can call by name. And that's in the SteamVR actions class. So I can go SteamVR actions.farming. All of our action sets and actions are individually listed here. .plant. And now I need to reference which device I want to access inside this action. I want to access the left or the right hand or any. I want to access the input device associated with the hand that's on the same object. So I'm going to say at hand.handType. And then I want the state of that action. So if SteamVR actions dot our action set farming dot our action plant at our hand type, if that state is true, then plant. My preference is to use these static action sets and action properties. But if you want something a little more familiar, a little more Unity-like, then you can access the SteamVR input class and then just get the state from there. You can pass in a string name for your action, but you still have to pass in an input source. And this will do exactly the same thing. If you have multiple actions called plant, you can also pass in your action set. All right, let's use this planting script. We'll go back to the hands, delete this old boring component, add our fancy new one, and then just set the prefab that we want to use to actually do the planting. I'm going to save that scene and go into VR. Going to teleport over here and press and hold the A button. So it's creating them so fast. It's creating a new flower every update, but they're so close together that they explode apart. And again, this is per hand. So, and with Unity 2018.3 or 2018. something, you get the new PhysX. And just lots of rigid bodies and still good performance. Awesome. So that's SteamVR input in the SteamVR Unity plugin. We've gone through this planning tutorial from having no project to importing the plugin, checking out the interaction system, creating our own action set, binding that action, and then using it in a component in different forms. If you have questions or want to talk to other SteamVR developers, we've got a Steam forum specifically devoted to that. It's in the SteamVR community. There's a SteamVR developers forum. If you find issues with the Unity plugin, then you can go to the SteamVR Unity plugin GitHub repo and create an issue. And if there's more tutorials that you want or more things that you want documented about the system, you can also create an issue for that on the GitHub repo. All right, thanks for watching and have fun creating new virtual realities.